Hey, we're continuing today on this series. This is a pretty, pretty applicable topic because we're in this thing called Squad Goals, and what we're specifically talking about, it's not just basic friendship, but what does God really want to do in your friendships that are spiritually focused friendships? More specifically, how does God provide different friends who are focused on His kingdom in your life that He uses to shape and form you in a better way so that you are ready to more engage His kingdom and His plans for your life? And listen, anytime we're journeying in a spiritual formation, in a spiritual way with others, we still have our own humanity and they still have their own humanity. As focused as we may be on God's kingdom and on being a part of light penetrating the darkness, we realize that what we're trying to do here in this spiritual enterprise called the church and following Christ, what we're trying to do is done in the middle of enemy territory. The evil one dominates this world, and we are existing in there. And so what we're trying to do here is really, really hard. If you're forging a friendship that's based on advancing God's kingdom in your own heart, in their heart, and advancing God's agenda out in the world, it is going to be really, really hard. And you're going to get caught up in it from time to time. And your humanity is going to take over, and it's going to create some conflict with people who you once, were unified with. Some passages, first of all, it shouldn't surprise you, okay? Because the Scriptures address this. Paul writes in 2 Timothy, when he's talking to Timothy's young pastor, he's like, hey, watch out for this, be careful of this, don't do this. And then he says at the end, he says, hey, Demas has deserted me because he loves the things of this life. I think Paul's like, one day there was, there's a group with Paul, and they're sprinting after the same stuff. They're just after God's kingdom, and they're seeing God's kingdom grow in different people's hearts and lives, and they're seeing grace and forgiveness and people stepping into that and feeling the freedom of that, and they're just amazed and in awe at all that stuff. And Demas is one of those guys. And then something happens, and all of a sudden Paul looks beside him, and Demas is no longer there. You're like, what happened? Well, he just decided to kind of not pursue the kingdom and to pursue some different pursuits that he wanted in this life. And so, he's off in whatever land, doing whatever he wants to do. Listen, when you're pursuing God's kingdom, it comes at the price of the things of this life. Just be real careful. Don't be deceived into thinking that you can give yourself fully to God's kingdom and do everything else too. There's sacrifices there. It just is. All right, and Demas, you know what? Hey, he's deserted me. He's gone off on his own deal. And then a few verses later, Paul writes this, Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. I mean, how'd you like to be that dude? And 2,000 years later, we're still talking about you. You probably have never read this verse, or nobody's ever taught on it because it's just not something we talk about. But it's there. Paul writes it for a reason. Alexander the coppersmith, he did me much harm, but the Lord will judge him for what he's done. So be careful of him, for he fought against everything we're doing, or everything we said. You feel the conflict? On top of that, I mean, Jesus had 12 disciples, and he was only 11 for 12, okay? I mean, that's a good percentile. I mean, that's above 90%. I mean, that's an A, okay? So Jesus gets an A, but he didn't get 100. And he was betrayed by one of his closest friends. That's what happens in this kingdom pursuit. Don't be deceived, okay? I know that there's so much about church and there's so much about spiritual community that is just nasty, selfish, like conflict and church junk, okay? That is rightfully just junk. But don't think that you're going to pursue God's kingdom and it's always going to be rosy and there's never going to be any conflict. There's always going to be conflict. There was with Jesus, there was with Paul, there will be with you, there is with me, okay? So the passage that I want to talk about today is just one of these clear passages. It's almost like it's a prescription. It's like step 1, 2, 3, 4. It is so easy to follow. The troubling thing about this passage isn't, gee, I wonder what Jesus is saying. No, it is so painfully clear. It's so hard to follow because it's so clear. It's like, could you be a little more vague? Because then that gives me some wiggle room about what I should do, what I shouldn't do. Jesus is like, no, here it is, follow it. And I'm amazed, even with the amazing clarity of this passage, I have rarely found it in people who follow Christ. So, this passage is written to people who are part of the family of God, and they have a problem with each other, okay? Jesus is anticipating this happen. It's going to happen. So when that happens, how are you doing? Let me tell you this. I almost feel like if you haven't had a little conflict with some of your great spiritual friends, there's probably just a little bit of a facade there that you're not willing to kind of, lay down. Because a mark of some great relationship isn't their absence of conflict, but their ability to persevere and pursue each other's heart through conflict, okay? Like that's maybe one of the greatest community builders ever, is the successful resolve of conflict, where the authenticity is on the table, where the feelings of hurt and betrayal and pain are there, where forgiveness is asked for and extended, and grace dominates. It reminds us all again what Jesus is and who he is to us. And we celebrate that all over again in how we act with each other. It is some of the best community builder things that could ever happen. And so next time you see conflict, don't be like, oh no. Maybe it's like, no, this could be great opportunity, particularly if you follow this. All right, here we go. By the way, even if you're not a follower of Christ, even if this is the first time you've ever been to church, if you practice this apart from the spiritual side, I think your relationships will work out so much better. If you want to try this in your marriage, I would just encourage you to do that. But this is all human relationships. Here we go. If another believer sins against you, go to him privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you've won that person back. It's real simple instruction, right? It's easy to understand, hard to practice. Because here's what you have to do. The first thing you have to do is you have to go. If somebody sins against you, you have to go. About half of you in this room are conflict avoiders. You don't go. You just don't. I know you don't understand, David. That might be your personality, but that's not mine. Well, our personalities don't get a break from God's direction. He created you with your personality, and he still gives you these directions. You have to go. For some of you, that's easy. And if it's easy for you to go, then you need to be careful. Because you probably need to, pipe down a little bit. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm taking care of this right now. Uh-huh. No. Jesus said go. I'm going. No, you just need to stay for a little bit, all right? Go. It takes initiative. Let me tell you what else it takes. It takes a lot of humility. Because some of you, you're not willing to admit that somebody else has the power to hurt you. You're not willing to display weakness that says, you know what, you sinned against me, and that really, that hurt. It stunned me. You would rather be a little bit arm's length. And so for you to go and say, hey, you've sinned against me, that's a humble step. Really, it's a weakness that says, hey, I am weak here because that hurt me, and I'm not going to stay strong and put the stiff upper lip and say, I'm fine. You have to go. Second thing you have to do, and this might be harder. It just gets harder, okay? You have to go in private. This means before you ask one of your friends to pray for you because you're going, because this is what they did. That's the second. No, you go in private. You go to them before you go to anyone else. You go to them before you go to social media. You go to them before you ask for prayer for this situation. You go to them in private. Let me tell you what you do if you're not going in private. If you bring somebody else into the mix, you are in the realm of gossip and slander. Period. There's no way around it. Because you are convicting this person without a conversation. And you are changing the way your friends or the people you're sharing with it view that person. So that's what you're doing. So listen, stop it. Just don't do it anymore. Go in private. Look, there's a lot of fear about going in private. A lot of fear. A lot of fear for me because like if you go in private and nobody else knows, I don't know how that conversation is going to get, shared. But you know what? That's the risk that we take with faith. To follow Christ, we overcome our fears, we put our lives in His hands, and we trust Him. That's what we do. So if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. So you got to speak directly. It's no hem-haw around the situation. Well, no, like this is what you did, and this is where you sinned against me, and this is what hurt me. Speak directly. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back, which is the fourth thing. Like you have to go in private, you have to speak directly, and you have to go with the goal of reconciliation. Listen, the goal here is not to point out offense. The goal here is not to say, look how bad you are. The goal here is not to say, look how righteous I am and what a pitiful sinner you are. The goal here is there is division and there's conflict, and I don't want that to be the case anymore. I want us to be back to where we were, running the kingdom together. And if it works, you've won that person back. And if it doesn't, Jesus has step 2 for you. But if you're unsuccessful, take 1 or 2 others with you and go back again, so that everything you say might be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Bring a neutral party with you. Don't bring your best friend, their worst enemy. Okay? This is not gang tackle here. All right? This is, wow, like, that didn't go like I'd hoped. We're still got some division here. I need somebody else here. Bring a neutral party. Like, there are some people that you know are good peacekeepers. And then there are some people that you know are agitators. I'm generally in the second category, okay? You probably don't want to bring me with you. But you might. But like, now my wife, she likes everything peaceful, all right? She's a great person to bring with. Personalities to bring with you and personalities not to bring with you. And you bring somebody with you to do this, to confirm your words. Because look, sometimes when it's about sin and when it's about conflict, look, it is challenging. It is hard. Like there's a whole lot of room for misunderstanding. And if you've already tried this once and this person misunderstood what you're saying or you misunderstood what they're, and it's created a little bit of more of a stir, hey, let's bring somebody in just so that there's some clarity. Now, what are you saying? Now, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? All this, okay? Just somebody that can help with that. If that doesn't work, Jesus has step 3. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Now, it's funny. This is the second time in the Gospels that Jesus uses the word church, and the church doesn't even exist yet. It's the gathering. The official church doesn't exist yet, in a sense. It's after he's obviously resurrected. But, so it's kind of like, what's he meaning here? And so different churches practice this different way. I know churches that do this right here. Like, hey, you have conflict with you. We've been trying to work this out, so we haven't been able to resolve it in step 1 or 2. So if y'all want to come on down here into the front here, we'll just have the people's court right here on Sunday morning. Here we go. There's churches that do that right now. And you know what? Some of it's like, okay, it's kind of because I don't want it to go that far. Let's get this done in step 1 or 2, right? I mean, there's part of that. And so that's part of it. We don't do it that way here. But there are leaders and collection of leaders, elders, staff that are willing to be kind of a resolve of conflict, particularly for two people that are inside this particular family. What you need to do in this is you need to engage a group of people that are committed to forgiveness and unity. Okay? That's what the church is. It's our foundation. If that doesn't work, he's got 4 steps here. Look what he says. Then, if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. Now, it's kind of like, here, let me tell you this. If you're heading into this, step 1, hoping you get to step 4, your heart's not in the right place, okay? Does everybody understand that? You need to go back to step 1. Remember, your goal here is reconciliation. But if you're like, I'm going to go through steps in 1 and 2 and 3 because I want to treat them like a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. Okay, work on your own heart. If you get to this step, there is a deep sadness. Okay? A deep sadness at the loss of a friendship that you once ran together with, and now there's not the together part. And you've tried to reconcile that, and it has been unsuccessful. If you get to step 4 and you feel any joy, you gotta check your own heart. All right? But let's talk about how Jesus treats pagans and corrupt tax collectors. Because it seems to me that Jesus still hangs out with those people. In fact, that's one of the things that got him crucified. So I don't think he's saying, now you can treat them like your sinful heart's always wanted you to treat it and be justified in it. No. He's saying this, look, inside the family of God, we operate on the foundation of forgiveness. Like, guys, the thing that stuns me about church conflict and conflict among people who call themselves followers of Christ is this. The prerequisite for you to be in the family of God, the very first step for you to get into the family of God is for you to admit that you are a miserable, complete, selfish sinner. And that's not just what you do, that is who you are in your heart. And you can't do anything but sin. And that's why you need a Savior to save you from yourself and your sin. That's how you get into the family of God. And I don't know what changes once you're in the family of God that you forget that. And that you forget that everybody else that's in the family of God is the same first step. Yes, we're on the path of redemption. Yes, God has forgiven us and cleansed us from all unrighteousness. Yes, we are adopted into His family and we are sons and daughters of God. But there's still friction because there's still some selfish flesh that hangs on. And we still do stupid stuff sometimes. And we don't walk in the redemption of Christ. And we sin against each other. And we should say, golly, I'm not there yet. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I know that hurt. Will you please forgive me? Because that's entrance in. But what he's saying here is, look, that's how we should treat each other inside. People outside who they don't operate under the basis of forgiveness. I mean, you don't go to your your boss or your roommate or your classmate or your professor and operate as if they're a follower of Christ on the foundation of forgiveness. You just don't do it because you don't know if that's where they're at. And in the world, like if I mess up in the world, I hope they forgive me, but they're not bound by anything that tells them to forgive me. So you've got to treat them differently. They're not operating on the foundation, fundamental principle that this is a community that is forged by grace and forgiveness. And that's the understanding. Once this person has gone through this route, rejected all that, now you've got to treat them like an outsider. How do you treat outsiders? Well, you treat them with compassion. You treat them with grace. You hope they understand. Okay? But without a commitment to forgive one another. They don't have that commitment. Paul says in Colossians 4, he says this, live wisely among those who are not believers. Be wise about it. And make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you'll have the right response for everyone. That's how we treat the unbeliever. On top of that, Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, he says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you're honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. Listen, that's how you treat somebody outside. As you do with wisdom. With compassion. But they are not obligated to forgive you. Inside, if you forget everything else, you got to remember this. The reason you should forgive is because you've been forgiven. I mean, in this family of God, honestly, like if somebody asks you for forgiveness, you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. You're saying, no, I do have a choice. Well, you do, but you don't. Listen, I've been through this process on both sides of it. And I have hit a couple of times some really, like times where it took me back. It's a gut check. And I literally feared for the person that was standing in front of me. Because I've been in the place where I've been asking for forgiveness. Not the one offended, but I have asked for forgiveness from somebody, and they have said, nah, I'm not ready to forgive you. I'm not sure I'll ever be. And they're a follower of Christ. And I thought, man, I literally said to them, do you understand what ground that puts you on? Do you understand that Jesus teaches if you refuse to forgive your brother and sister, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. That's Jesus' teaching. That's his word. I mean, do you ever want to get in that place? Do you ever want to be there? See, later, this is a great, Matthew 18. Just mark it down, okay? Because you're going to come back to this, all right? 4 steps. But those are like step 1, step 2. You know, it's prescriptive. Then Jesus does this, all right? And all I'm going to do is read the story that he tells. And then I'm going to pray and we're done. But listen to this story. Because right after he teaches like this, he goes into this story. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors who was brought in, who owed him millions of dollars. And he couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife and children and everything he owned to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master, begged him, please, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. And he grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. "Please be patient with me. I'll pay it," he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called the man he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I have mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he paid his entire debt. That's what my heavenly Father will do if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. God, I'm grateful for the clarity of teaching. I'm grateful that you care about the points in our life where it's not easy and there's conflict and there's betrayal and there's sin. And I pray, Father, that you would remind each of us in this room of your teaching, Lord, that we would be able to practice it and that we would be able to trust you through each step of the process. And God, that we would see relationship after relationship reconciled. God, that we would see relationships reconciled that we didn't even know were in conflict because they handled it just between the two of them in private. God, that we would advance forward to everything that you have planned for us with unity and with purpose, knowing that we're in a community of followers who are flawed and we still sin. So help us to be compassionate and gracious, particularly when somebody comes and points out. I pray that you would just help our defenses to drop, that we would see their heart, that we would go with a heart of reconciliation. And God, that the testimony of the church in this world would not be one of division, strife, conflict, but be one of conflict that gets resolved, of people who are imperfect, who relate to each other in an authentic, loving way, who hurt each other's feelings, but are quick to forgive, quick to seek reconciliation. And God, that would be the testimony. I pray for our students, middle school and high school and college, in the world that, everything moves fast with social media and everything else. Lord, there be a deep commitment to this in practice. And that you'd work it out in their hearts and their lives and their friendships, and that would forge a different world in this school and the schools around here, on university campuses. I pray, Father, that you would teach us so much about yourself. And God, that you would remind us each time we have the opportunity to forgive somebody, each time somebody has hurt us, that we have the opportunity to imitate you, the forgiver of sin. And God, that each time that somebody sins against us and comes and asks for forgiveness, God, that we would celebrate the opportunity to forgive them as you have forgiven us. That we would be reminded of our sin that we have racked up against you. And that we would rejoice once again that we are free and forgiven because of the blood and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. God, we're grateful for your love for us. We're grateful for your direction to us, that you don't leave us on our own. We're grateful for the scriptures that give us hope and peace and confidence in what we need to do with our lives. Help us to step in it, walk in it, trust it. We pray in Jesus' name.